Shut up and sit down.
Hi guys, this is Bigmeks Workshop and Paint Studio. I'm Dodge and this is the paint palette tutorial. It's not a full length tutorial. What we've done is we broke down the video into 6 different sections so we can do 6 different versions of something. Example, leather, metallics, and you can get a good look at 6 different ways of doing things so you can find the colour for your army a lot faster than going through loads and loads of tutorials. So in a minute there's going to be 6 different images with timestamps so you can find the bit of the video that you want, and as this is not a normal layout of tutorial, I may not see you at the end, although I will be summarising everything at the end. So if I don't see you at the end, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share with your friends and leave a comment if you want to request any more paint palette videos. So here we go again guys, this is the Greenskins part 2. As we did 6 already a long time ago, the video is not as good quality as this one. I was simply going to remake that video, but then I started mucking about with the greens and came up with a bunch of different ones, so I thought we'd just add to the paint palette series, as that's what we're doing. We're trying to build up a huge collection of small clips of video so you get all the best colours all in one place and you can find what you're looking for. So I did stay away from the Games Workshop paints, as that's basically what I was using in the first one. So the first arm we're going to paint in Caliban Green by Games Workshop. We're going to use similar techniques here. We're going to base them, we're then going to mix colours to help the transition and the glazing go a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. Next up, we're going to add Scale 75's Black Forest Green into the Caliban Green. They are very similar colours, but as you see these dry soon, you'll see them. That does give us a nice smooth transition rather than just jumping from one colour to the other. And that being said, obviously the next colour then is just going to be Black Forest Green by Scale 75 on its own now. And you can see we've got a nice dark green underneath already and a good transition over those muscles. As always, I tend to glaze up the shoulder as that's going to catch the most light, and little bits of the muscles here and there. If you want to keep your paint thin, I'm always using a wet palette for these, but you don't have to be too neat if you're doing an entire horde of orcs. I'm guessing you're going to want to get them done pretty quick. Next up, we're going to use Boreal Green by Scale 75. Not too much to say about this one, I'm just going to get that on nice and quick. But you can see the previous paint layers, now they've dried, have started to give us a really cool transition. When it comes to glazing, all you're doing is going over those same areas, but a little bit less with each extra colour that we add to this. Now we're going to add Greenskin Flesh by Scale 75 into the Boreal Green by Scale 75. And this is going to lighten it up because the green skin is actually quite a goblin-y green. So you don't want to go too over the top there. I do like the transitions to be subtle rather than jump from one colour straight to another. Next, just to help blend that together, we're going to add a Biotang Green wash by Games Workshop. I'm going to keep that watered down. I think I ended up doing 2 layers. It's best to put on 2 layers and not put on too much. And that's really going to enrich the green skin flesh that we've added on there. I do apologise that sometimes you won't really see the result of the paint yet. And you won't really see the result until the next bit of footage, because it takes quite some time to add that transition in there and get it going. Now we're going to go back to the Boreal Green and the green skin flesh. And all that noise in the background is Andy getting back from the shop. Next up, we're going to use Green Skin Flesh by Scale 75 on its own. And at this point, you could really start to see how those colours are reacting together, and they're really bringing everything out. After this, I think there's only one more colour left. Even though there isn't any actual blue on here, that dark green on the underneath does have a sort of blue hue to it from this angle. But there's definitely not actually any blue on it. Not to my eyes anyway. It just looks that way on the camera. Next, Sabarite Green by Games Workshop. Which is a bit of a pasty bright green. But it really does have that sort of blue hue to that one, I guess. It just sort of help complement those shaded areas and help add that bit of contrast in. And there we have it. That's nice and simple. It gives a good transition. Quite a few colours. So if you're doing a horde, you're probably going to want to cut a few of these mixed colours out and just go straight from one to the other. You'll get a similar result. But I was trying to make these nice and smooth. Number 2. Looking at this colour list, I think this is one of the more pale sort of orc skins that we're going to go for. And we're going to start with Rift Green by Scale 75. As you can see, that actually looks quite a lot like the Caliban green. The green sections from Scale 75 are actually really nice. And they've got a good transition from greens to yellows to blues as well. So we're a big fan of the Scale 75s in this studio. Next, we're going to add Scale 75 MERN Green into the Rift Green for our first highlight. Like I said on the other arms, we're going to keep targeting those same places with the glazing. By the time you've got to the knuckles, your paint should be so thin that all the rest of this is then dried. And you can go back over it. Some of these bits of footage are a little bit long. The reason for that is I want you to be able to see the transition going on and the paint being applied. Next, we're just simply going to add more MERN Green. And by doing this, we're slowly going to build up a colour transition without much work at all really, just by mixing paints. I do recommend mixing paints unless you're batch painting an entire unit, because when you go to paint a next unit for your army, there's a chance that you're not going to be able to mix the same colour correctly. So I'd understand why people would go from one pot to another. Next, it's just going to be MERN Green on its own now. Less colours in this one, but more of the same colour, more highlights I guess. Next, we're going to add ARDENNES Green by Scale 75 into the MERN Green. And at this point we should be getting some nice three-dimensional shape on the arm. And really start bringing out that muscle texture. And like I was saying before, it's always the same places I'm going over, just going over them a little less, taking up a little less space. After that, we're going to switch to a Games Workshop paint and use Lauren Forest. And as you can see, that workspace we're getting to is getting smaller and smaller. But when you're doing glazing, you want to make sure you've got enough space left for your next colours. So if you're going to follow this along, I suggest watching it to the end to see how many colours are on there, and then work your way back. Step there. That way you'll get a more accurate copy of this as well. Next, this is Scale 75's... No, it's not. Sorry, this is Athonian Camo Shade by Games Workshop. One of the reasons for that is it's got a slightly yellow hue, and I thought we were losing a little bit too much colour from the highlights, and they were getting a bit pasty. So it's going to add a bit of green, but it's a yellowy brown green, so that's going to put the colour back into those flat areas. Then I'm going to go to Games Workshop's STRAKEN Green and just start working to the very fine points on the knuckles and the highlights on the muscles and the shoulder. It's very easy to go a bit too strong with these colours because they are so flat compared to the rich greens on the underneath. Just make sure you do it in very thin layers. Next up, all we're going to do is add a little bit of NURGLING green, because I thought one final highlight couldn't hurt. As you can see, that's really brought all that shape up. And it's quite a nice transition. We're going to do another one at the end of this video that's similar to this, but we're going to use more a human flesh colour for the highlights. What I noticed about this one is a really good one for doing orc faces, like around the mouth area and stuff, because it fades the lips to that sort of flesh colour. And there you have it. If it's too pasty still for you, you can always go back to an Athonian camo shade and put some more colour in those flat areas that are a bit pale now. Next up, this one, if I remember correctly, is a very goblin-y green. And with this one, we're going to start off with the Games Workshop's Lauren Forest as a base. I do tend to stick with the Games Workshop paints as a base, as the pigment's thicker. It just gives me a better coverage for me to work with, rather than spending a long time putting a base coat on using a scale 75 paint. So it's a bit of a shortcut. Next, we're going to take scale 75's Sherwood green and add that to the Lauren Forest. And the Sherwood green is actually quite well, it's a really yellowy green actually. There's quite a few of those, but they're not too yellow. They're not like your luminous fluorescent yellows. And again, we're going to add more Sherwood green into the previous mix. And at this point, because we keep adding the Sherwood green, you can sort of see what kind of yellow we've got here, what kind of yellowy green. And this is why I thought this is a very small goblin kind of look, more of a fantasy forest goblin. Now to add a little bit more colour to this, we're going to take that Sherwood green and we're going to add fall green by scale 75, which is a much more vibrant yellow. And as you can see, it's really starting to build up there with the yellow areas. Again, as I've been saying with the rest of these, just working on the shoulder, the knuckles and the highlight areas, starting from the shade, pulling to the light areas. Now to add a little bit more depth, because it was looking a little bit flat, so we're going to use Army Painter Green Tone. The reason I did this was the Biletan Green by Games Workshop is just a bit too bright. I didn't want to put bright colours in those shaded areas. If it was too green, it would look off now, as everything else is quite a solid pasty yellow. More of a pastel-y yellow, to be honest. Next, I decided that didn't quite give me enough depth, so I'm going to add Army Painter Green Tone and a little drop of nut oil. And this is why we do our washes really thin and in multiple steps, so we can just add those in. If you just drowned it in the wash, you wouldn't be able to go back. The sculpt for these arms are really good. I do enjoy painting these muscle textures just because they sculpt so well. It gives me something to work on with glazing. It's a really good thing to practice on with glazing. Now we're going back to the Sherwood green and fall green that we had. Now we've added the depth in, we're going to bring up those highlights a little bit more as they've been washed out with both those washes. We're going to add a very small amount of Rakhor flesh into that mix. And this, for me, it does take away some of the yellow. But what we're going to do is we're going to go back over that in a sec. We're just making the area underneath this a bit more pale, and then we're going to come back and put the other colour over the top of it again. Which is a strange way of doing it, but it did seem to get a decent result. Yes, I also noticed at this point that my exposure on the camera was too high, and that's why the colour looks so different. Then we're just going to go back to the fall green and go back over the very tips of the Rakhor flesh, just to add that little bit of colour. Also, because the Rakoth flesh colours underneath is quite pale, it's actually going to brighten up the foregreen as well when you go over it. Seems like a bit of a back and forth step, but something interesting at least. And there we have it. Not too difficult, this one. Not too many colours, mainly just mixing. But if you want more depth in it, simply go back to doing more washes, and you can paint those in the recesses if you want to. So number 4 is an interesting one. Decided to do something different with a little bit of a blue hue to it instead, just for options really. There's so many ways of doing green flesh. We're going to start with Carbolite Green by Games Workshop, or Carbolite. I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but there's the name of the paint there so you can find it. The reason I started with this blue one as well is we have a scale 75 paint with a very specific name, and I thought, let's try and do something a little bit different with this. So what we're going to do next is we're going to add this paint, scale 75. It's called Surfer Orc Flesh, so we thought, why not do something a bit more blue for a change? You know, the name's quite fitting for what we're doing. We're just going to add that into the Carbolite Green, and it makes a pretty subtle transition. So as you can imagine, it's about 50-50 mix there. And the colour will change a lot, but I thought this is a good start for a base tone. There's not too many colours to this one, to be honest. You get the result quite quickly. Next up, we're going to add Surfer Orc Flesh on its own now. Again, like I said with all the other arms that we've been painting, you want to work on that shoulder from the bottom to the top with very thin paint, the knuckles and the same tops of the muscles all the way around. So with all of these, it's always the same technique. It's the same technique we used on the human skin. It's just how I ended up painting skin, and it seems to work pretty well, so I'll stick with it. I think there's always room for improvement as we go. See if I can find something better for a technique, but I don't think I will. Next, we're going to add Scale 75's Spring Green into the Surfer Orc Flesh. Now this is where the colour really starts to change, because Spring Green is actually more of a green. Obviously this sort of colour, you don't have to just use this for an orc flesh. You could obviously use it for any other fantasy creature or sci-fi creature. Might be a good flesh for Tau actually. It does sort of have that aquatic feel, so I guess that's why they called it Surfer Orc Flesh. Next, we're going to add Biotang Green by Scale 75, just to add a bit more depth. It's also going to enrich those actual greens that I wanted. So, because it's a green filter over the bluey green colour, it's really going to just enrich those greens and help them pop out a little bit more. But then the blue is going to be there for a contrast. Suppose you could have used Games Workshop's Dragonoff Nightshade if you wanted to, but keep it watered down and do it in a few steps. Might get an interesting result. And once that's dried, we're going to use Spring Green on its own, and that will be the final highlight for this. And as you can see, we have this sort of semi-aquatic blue fantasy orc look. Did kind of like the results with this one. Didn't really need to take it up much further, as the colours are such high contrast that it really emphasises the shape. And there's a lot you can play with this one. I hope it shows up on camera well enough for you. You probably could go from Spring Green to something else if you wanted to, but I just wanted to really keep that blend between the blue and the green nice and strong. It does make the greens look a bit more yellow actually, because the shaded area is so blue. But yeah, there you go. That's that one done. I figured you'd like something a little bit different. Next, we're going to muck about with much brighter, cartoony kind of orc looks. And we're going to start with Games Workshop's Warpstone Glow. So it gives you an idea of how bright we're going to make this. Just a note, Warpstone Glow does not cover black very well. It takes quite a few layers, so keep it thin and just be patient. Next, we're going to use Scale 75's IRATI Green as a highlight, and this is its colour on its own. And I did find that this is extremely similar to Warpstone Glow, but does give a very nice transition and coverage. Obviously at this point of the video here it doesn't show up that well, but obviously when we get to the next clip, when we add the next colour, you're going to see how much paint's been put on there, and you're going to see the transition. It's one of the problems I have with making these videos and doing glazing. Next we're going to use 2 washes of Army Painter Green Tone. I think I've used this quite a few times in this video. I'll just say again, the Biotang green by Games Workshop, for me, it's just not the right type of green. It's a very cartoony, sort of surreal green. I don't really feel like it belongs in the shades. If you mix a little bit of null oil, you can get a similar result to the Army Painter Green Tone. Next, we're going to go back to the IRATI Green, and you can see there's quite a subtle transition, especially with those washes that we've put on. We're going to keep working to those top areas, but you can slowly see the tops of those muscles and the knuckles, they're all going to start brightening up. Pretty sure most of these colours would also work if you were doing this with an airbrush and you were just overspraying a horde of orcs. That would work as well. Next, we're going to add a bit of Games Workshop's Moot Green into the IRATI Green by Scale 75, and this is where things start to get really, really bright. Like I said on the other arms, definitely worth getting yourself some of these Scale 75 paints, especially if you're wanting nice smooth results and you actually enjoy glazing like I do. It's not really the glazing, it's the pushing yourself to make things look smoother and nicer, I guess. That's what I enjoy most. Next up, we're going to be using Games Workshop's Moot Green on its own. And if you've got a Moot Green around, you know exactly how bright that is, but it does still have a slight yellow hue to it, which makes it work as a highlight for these darker greens. They're not only darker, they're a bit flatter and less saturated. So now we're really adding some colour to those highlights, which is going to make it look really striking. After that, we're going to add Scale 75 Toxic Waste Green into the Moot Green, and that's going to be our final highlight, as I really didn't want to take this up any brighter than this. I don't know if anyone would actually use this as a greenskin sort of scheme, but I thought it was an interesting combination of colours, and I'm sure someone will find a use for this colour combination. And if I took it any brighter, you probably could have used it for plasma coils and OSL on things, maybe even green lights, but I'm sure someone out there likes their orcs bright and fancy. And there you have it. Another simple one. Of course, you can add more washes onto this if you want to. Instead of taking away from the bright areas, just sort of paint the wash into those recesses sparingly and keep it watered down. And that way you won't take away any of those highlights, but you can add even more shape to the arm, which is something I could have done, but I didn't deem it necessary for this particular paint scheme. And the final one, this is the one where we start mucking about with actual flesh colours in the greens. Not too many paints here, so there's not too many steps, and we're going to start with Games Workshop's Castellian Green. Just give that a nice coat. I've got that a bit thin, it's going to take 2 or 3 coats, but I need a good coverage to work with. I did kind of like this one. It's one of those that will tend to work really well for just doing around the mouths of the orcs, where the colour transition changes from their regular skin. So next we're going to add STRAKEN Green by Games Workshop into the Castellian Green. That's going to be our first highlight. I'm going to start working on the top of the hand, the shoulder and the tops of all the muscles. I'm mainly going to focus on the knuckles for this, as it's going to show you the result that I was going for when it came to that particular colour transition. Next, we're going to add Scale 75's BLACKERT Brown into that entire mix. So that's all three colours there now. Now, BLACKERT Brown is actually more of a human flesh colour, so you want to be really sparing when putting the first amount in. But I'm glad that bit of footage shows up nicely there. You can see that colour transition and why we'd pick to change to a human flesh over the green skin flesh to get a different result. Next, we're going to just use STRAKEN Green and BLACKERT Brown together. Again, we're going to be really sparing with the BLACKERT Brown as we don't want to take out all the green. But I found when mixing them in the wet palette, they do make a nice colour. It's sort of a pinky green, if that's even an actual colour. Next, we're going to add Scale 75 Resurrection Flesh into the STRAKEN Green BLACKERT Brown mix. This is because it's another flesh colour, but it's much brighter than the BLACKERT Brown, and that's going to lighten that up. Could have tried to use a Scale 75, but I felt that would flatten the colour and take too much away where we're trying to add the pink into this. And now what we're going to do is just add one more small amount of Resurrection Flesh into that. As you can see, it doesn't look too pink, but it definitely changes the tone and hue of the rest of the skin, so you can add those highlights. And there we have it. You can go up as high as you want with this. You could actually go up to that Resurrection Flesh if you wanted, or something even brighter than that. But I did think that gave a nice result. Thought you guys would like that one. Plus, I was also starting to struggle to come up with 6 other orc schemes, but I'm sure over time we'll come up with some more and put those into a paint palette for you as well. Next, we're going to stick them all side by side on the Lazy Susan, so you can compare the different tones and colours. So this video, we did get quite a lot of variation here, which is what I was going for, as we've already got 6. So this is now 12 different green skin colours. Did kind of enjoy doing these, mainly because I enjoy doing the glazing. I'm one of them odd people that actually enjoy glazing things, and arms are one of the best things to do it, especially the orc arms because of the muscle texture. So, we've got to the end of the video. I don't know which bit of the video you watched, but thanks for watching it anyway. You guys are awesome. We do love the support we get on the channel. If you've got any questions or suggestions, you know where the comments are. Drop one in there. And all the links to our other social media are in the description. So we've got some thank yous to give out to our patrons. These guys help support the channel. Thank you to the Orc Boys, Matt, Ludwig Hofbauer, DWAC, Mark, Dave. You guys are awesome. Your support helps us buy more models for more painting tutorials, so we can keep doing this for you guys. If you want to join them, links are in the description, as well as a link for the Outpost. Go check out the Outpost if you want 15 to 20% off all your hobby supplies. Anything from brushes, glues to models. They've got the whole Games Workshop range, and most of the paints and stuff we've got you can buy there as well. So go for the affiliate link and they'll give us 5% store credit just for the advertisement. And I think that's all for me. So don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, and definitely share with your friends, because that helps us out. And if you want to see more paint palette and more added to this series, do leave us a comment, let us know. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.